Hi, everyone. It's Candace from Autism One Radio. We know that Christina Hildebrand from voiceforchoiceadvocacy.org has been lobbying in Sacramento to fight these bills, SB276 and SB714. So just last week, there was an uprising up at the Capitol in Sacramento, and the governor signed these bills into law. So today, Christina is going to go over these bills with us. Today's date is 9/16/19, and Christina is going to clarify what this means for our families. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning, Candace. Thank you for having me on again.
Oh, thank you, because if it weren't for you, I don't think I would know what's going on legally. So if you could just go over the legal updates regarding these bills and tell us about the grandfathered clause and what the mandates are for these bills.
Sure. So just for anybody who give a bit of background, so I'm Christina Hildebrand. Voice for Choice Advocacy is our organization, and we've lobbied against. We started during SB277, which was the law in 2015 that was passed that removed the personal belief exemption and allowed only medical exemptions for entry into school if your children weren't vaccinated. Senator Pan introduced SB276 this year, which would basically become a lot more stringent on the medical exemptions, the criteria for medical exemptions, and to sort of crack down on the doctors and really review the doctors that are writing medical exemptions. The way the bill ended up, so let's go back to probably 2 weeks ago, which is probably when we spoke last, but SB276 at that time was a bill in and of itself, and Senator Pan pushed it through the Assembly floor, and after that the world got a tweet from the governor saying that this was not, he wasn't willing to sign it without amendments, and Senator Pan and the mainstream media all threw up their arms and said, but you made a deal with us and you were going to sign this. And what's interesting was everybody on the other side was just like, yeah, we were really surprised that there weren't any amendments, because in August the governor had come out and said he needed more amendments, or was inclined to sign the bill, but thought that there was more work to be done on it. So Senator Pan scrambled, and he pushed SB276 through and scrambled to create a gut and amend bill, which is basically a bill that was at the same part of the process that it needed to be in the Assembly. And he basically took everything out of that bill and put in amendments. And the governor had asked for 4 amendments, and I believe the governor got his amendments, but Senator Pan also added some additional amendments. And, I can't speak for the governor, but I'm pretty sure, I would give it a guess that the governor did not realize the implications of those additional amendments that were made that were not before that he asked for. And they made the bill worse. In different ways. I would say, so that was SB714, and so we now have 2 bills, same year, one that sort of overrides the other. 714 overrides any piece that is changed from SB276. So we're left with a bill that any child that handed this piece of work in would get an F for it in their school. Our legislators Senator Pan should be given an F, and our legislators should be given an F for passing this bill. It is so poorly written. There are so many circular references. There's so much duplication that means different things. There are pieces that are completely omitted. It is extremely vague in many areas, and it really is a bad piece of legislation just from the content, just from the writing of it. So I will go through what it means, but I will say this is a Voice for Choice Advocacy's interpretation of it, and I think there are many pieces of it that we have to see how CDPH interprets it and implements it. The crux of SB276 is that, number one, there come 2021. So what is clear is what happens in 2021. What is also clear is what happens prior to 2020. The gray area is this 2020. And, prior to SB714, every date referenced 2021. So with just 276, we knew what was going on. We knew it was all going to be implemented starting 2021. SB714 brought into play this 2020 year and things happening differently that year and things happening differently for the kids that have medical exemptions this year. So overall, starting 2021, you have to have a medical exemption written by a doctor that follows the CDC contraindications and precautions, or there's a little segue for family history, but we really don't think that that's going to have much play, especially given that there is one person at the CDPH that is going to California Public Health Department that's going to be in charge of reviewing and sort of escalating, reviewing and revoking and escalating different medical exemptions. And so, I can see that person being very subjective and not objective, not treating everyone equal, but they see a doctor and go, oh, I don't really like the look of that doctor. I'm going to review more and revoke more of their medical exemptions. So one of the things is that the criteria is lessened. And then the other big thing is that medical exemptions will get reviewed and possibly revoked by the CDPH. And how that's going to work is if your doctor, the other piece of this is you have to, come 2021, you have to file your medical exemption, or your doctor has to file your medical exemption into the CARE database. The CARE database is the California Immunization Registry, which currently holds your children's vaccination records if they are vaccinated for most children. So there are many doctors that do not use the CARE database to input vaccinations. It is the goal of that database, but it's expensive, it's time consuming, and so many doctors' practices don't do that. They just keep individual records. The CARE database, so you'll upload your medical exemption, or your doctor will upload the medical exemption in this one form that gets uploaded, and that then gets put into the database. So come 2021, the analysis that they'll do is they'll look at how many doctors have written 5 or more medical exemptions, and they will then review all of their medical exemptions. Now, it's also not clear what they're reviewing in any of this. And let me go a bit further, and then I'll come back to that point. The other place is if your school has a 95% a less than 95% vaccination rate, overall vaccination rate, and I'll talk a little bit more than that, or if your school is not reporting their vaccination rates. So those 3 trigger a review, either of the school or the doctor. And what's not clear is, if a doctor writes 5 exemptions, they've written that 5th one, what is reviewed? Are those 5 exemptions reviewed? And if all 5 of those are fine, then, they're good for the year and they can continue writing without being reviewed further? Or is it everything that year that gets reviewed? Is it everything, previously that they've done gets reviewed? Is it everything for the future that gets reviewed? There's no understanding of this. So the doctor that puts the 5th exemption out there for the first time is really putting their neck out there. The issue with the 95% overall vaccination level of schools, that's also an issue for us, because a school can be at 60% overall vaccination rate, but have 95% vaccination rate for all of the contagious diseases. So the way that's calculated, and really we only care about we should only care about contagious diseases in the classroom, because something like hepatitis B, which is a requirement for school, you're not going to it's not contagious. If there's a child in the classroom with hepatitis B, they don't actually have to tell anyone that they have hepatitis B. But the fact that most of the children in a class are not vaccinated for hepatitis B isn't going to, affect the herd immunity, as they like to call it, of this, of the classroom. And so the way the average vaccination rate is calculated is if one person is missing 1 booster shot of, all of the shots they need for school, they're missing 1 booster shot, let's say of hepatitis B, they are counted as not fully vaccinated. And so into the average, they're at that person is 100% on measles, mumps, rubella, whooping cough, chickenpox, which are the contagious diseases, but they are not considered fully vaccinated in the average. And so you have 10 kids that are missing one shot, and they are all at a 0 level of they're counted as 0 or as not vaccinated, not fully vaccinated in the average calculation. So it's really misleading to use that number. So basically, come 2021, we don't expect any doctors other than probably oncologists or those that are really, those doctors have truly immunocompromised to be writing any medical exemptions. And I even wonder whether those will submit that fifth one. I think they have many of the doctors that are not doing this based on family history, not doing it based on genetics, not doing it based on the most recent research, but that are really doing it by the CDC contraindications. I wonder whether they really will put that fifth one in as well, because they're putting their license on the line. I think part of this is it isn't clear what's going to be reviewed and what is acceptable. And so, I equate it to my kid is doing biology in high school, and her teacher tells her, okay, we've got 8 topics that you are going to study. You need to write an essay on each of those 8 topics. You need to research it fully. You need to put in whatever you think is important, whatever you think is going to get you an A, and then you hand it in, and the teacher says, oh, okay, these were the 5 points I was looking for. You didn't include 4 of them, so while you did a beautiful essay, absolutely made your point, absolutely shows that you've learned everything about this topic, you didn't include the 5 points that I really wanted, so you're going to fail it. And that's basically what is happening to our doctors. There's no indication at this point of what they can submit, of what is viable. It all circulates back to this standard of care, relevant standard of care. Well, how do you define standard of care? I would love somebody to define standard of care, because my understanding is that standard of care does not include doctors who are using the latest research and using the latest technology in any field. If you take standard of care currently for diabetes, that's what the majority of doctors are using. However, we know just from science that there are doctors that are using new treatments, new cutting-edge research. Those people, I don't believe, are considered to be using standard of care. So similar, our doctors that are specialists in vaccine injury, in genomics, they are using cutting-edge research. They're using the latest technology to determine, who is at higher risk for vaccine injury. But that's not considered, and we've seen this by the medical board, that's not considered standard of care. And so it's really unfortunate that we're being, we're basically being set back. California and the U.S. believes and is moving towards precision medicine, personalized medicine, the medicine for the individual. And in this bill, we are really going back to one size fits all, just basically, yes, there will be some people harmed. Tough luck if it's your kid, because you're doing this for the greater good. And that's just not where we stand in this day and age. So, that's sort of the summary of the bill. What happens to your specific child? I will say that A Voice of Choice Advocacy has put out a sort of a quick cheat sheet of, in 2020 and in 2021, what happens to your child. So if your child is entering in 2020, if your child is entering any grade but TKK or 7th grade, they are grandfathered in for that year and for subsequent years until they get to that TKK or 7th grade checkpoint. And so you have and you can use your old medical exemption. The one place you can't use your old medical exemption, and again, I don't know how they're going to implement this, but there is a clause in there that if your doctor has ever been under disciplinary action, that your exemption will immediately be revoked by the medical board, which is really interesting, because you have doctors that, maybe 30 years ago got put on probation because they didn't take good enough notes, and they haven't been on, they've finished their probation, they haven't had any disciplinary action since, but yet, according to the law, and if you read it by the law, those doctors should not be writing medical exemptions. Now, there have been some people that have said, oh, well, it's just, it's the Dr. Sears clause. They just don't want Dr. Sears being, he's currently on probation. They don't want any of his medical exemptions, prior or now, to be valid anymore. And, I think we will see how they interpret it, and we will see whether they have the bandwidth to actually implement it. I mean, they would have to audit all of the California schools to see who has a medical exemption from Dr. Sears. And, they probably have done that already somewhat, but it'll be interesting to see how they implement it. And so, for those parents who have medical exemptions from Dr. Sears or from another doctor that's, on probation currently or has had disciplinary action, my response is, if you can get a medical exemption from another doctor that's dated 2019, I would do that and put it on file just as a safety precaution. For the kids going into kindergarten, TK, and 7th grade next year, so in 2020, they are not officially grandfathered in by the way the law is written, but they also don't have to comply with the 2021 criteria. So they're in this gray area, and I will say there have been different deductions of what that means. We based our deduction on what they did with SB277 and what we think CDPH has the bandwidth to do. So I may be wrong in this, and I hope I'm not. But my belief is that if you have a medical exemption next year, that you are basically grandfathered in, you will have to get a medical exemption that's dated 2020. So you need to go back to your doctor and you need to ask for them for that. Now, the doctor's numbers are being counted next year. So if they write more than 5 exemptions next year, they will be brought under review. And so the real question is how are they going to find those numbers? Because those medical exemptions don't have to be implemented or input into a database. So again, are they going to go to every school and find out, who the doctors are? They could do that. It's a lot of manual process. I mean, they took away the...
However, Christina, isn't that illegal? Isn't that a violation of FERPA?
Yes and no. So what we've seen is they could get all of the information without the kids' personal information. So it just shows the doctor. It's what they've done now. I mean, for anybody believing that we're not living SB276 today, we're living SB276 today. Most people don't realize that, but our doctors are under fire and our medical records are being databased. So to think that you're not is you're not living in reality of today. But what they will do, what I can see them doing, is them requesting the medical exemptions without with the redacted personal information, which is allowed. Those are handed over. They then count the doctors. So what they need is the doctor's name, right? So they count the doctors up, and anyone over 5, they then go to that doctor and they subpoena the medical records for all of the, they basically put it into an investigation process. And they subpoena the medical records, and they then find out your medical records, and they have access to those medical records. I think that's a lot that CDPH would have to do in 2020, as well as setting up this huge database issue with the immunization registry. So I think it's a lot. I think there are, if you read the CDPH or the CHHS, the Health and Human Services facts that they put out on SB276, it looks like everyone before 2021 is grandfathered in. And so we're making that an assumption. It is because it is not written in the bill. It is not written in this law. So everybody is making an assumption. The question is, who's making the assumption that the CDPH will finally make as well? We don't know. So, I would say if you're going into TK 7th grade kindergarten next year, 2020, you send me an email, because I can also help you with your individual situation. There are also differences for private schools versus public schools and things that, there are a number of things that we are working on that I don't have enough information on to say, this may happen or this may happen. But there are there's information that we are working on, and hopefully in the next month we'll have answers to, that will clarify what happens, what could specifically happen, and what are the lawsuits that are likely to come out of this.
Do we have an attorney that I saw on the steps of the Capitol, a woman, an attorney?
Yeah. And so there are different, it really, people are like, can you send me a list of attorneys? And my answer is, it really depends on what the issue is. And that's where, we probably have an attorney for everything, or have contacts that could get us an attorney for anything. But each individual piece of this puzzle is a different specialty. So, there are, I also want to just, before we get, and this reminded me of it, is just to be clear, a child on an IEP, so if your child is special needs and on an IEP, you continue to be exempt from SB277 and now from SB276. So if you have an IEP, please put that in instead of a medical exemption. And if you're having trouble with your school accepting that, we work with Educate Advocate, and they have helped a lot of kids get into school on IEPs. So that's one place. So don't feel like if your kid hit kindergarten or 7th grade after, or TK, after 2021, that you're at a loss. The other thing is homeschoolers are still exempt from this process. And then the other piece of so I would just say, look at what the other pieces of the puzzle are and what you can be doing. And I will say, if you have any questions, please look at our crib sheet first. It's on voiceforchoiceadvocacy.org, and it's on our Facebook page and on Twitter. But look at that, and if you're not in one of the clean-cut areas, in other words, you have something going on in 2020 or you have something going on in 2021, then feel free to email me, because there are things that, I won't say publicly that I think, are they're not workarounds to the law, but they are, what can you do? And you may have a risk of your class being, or your medical exemption being reviewed. But the other question is, has your doctor written more than 4 or 5 next year? Will they? And is your school below that 95% level? If you've got a doctor that doesn't write a lot, and and your school is above 95%, then you're unlikely to be reviewed, which is a good thing. The other thing that I should say is that the personal belief exemption. So there are 3 years. So if your child next year is going into 5th or 6th grade, or if your child is going into 12th grade next year, so starting 2020 school year, then you may still have a personal belief exemption on file that's grandfathered in under SB277. That is still grandfathered in until 7th grade or until you leave high school. So
that's fantastic. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So, there are exemptions. There are people that are exempt. And I would, I personally, if you have a personal belief exemption, do not put in a medical exemption, even if you have one on file, because you're exempt in the same way, but your medical exemption won't count towards that 95% in school, and it won't count towards the 5 doctors. So you'll come up against the same checkpoint at 7th grade, whether you've been grandfathered in with a personal belief exemption or grandfathered in under a medical exemption, but you're shielding our doctors and our kids that have, that need to put in a medical exemption before then, if you keep your personal belief exemption and not put in a medical exemption. So that's something that I would recommend. Again, I'm happy to consult with people. I'm happy to help people navigate, this is my situation. I will say, we put out our crib sheet last week because I had, nearly 1,000 emails saying, my kid's in 1st grade with this, my kid's in 5th grade, my kid's in 12th grade with this situation, can you help me? And, rather than answering each of them individually, my answer is go look at the crib sheet. And if you have that crib sheet, if you still have questions after looking at the crib sheet, then let us know.
Well, my hat's off to you for taking the time after 1,000 emails to talk to me today. I'm sorry. I'm at about 500. I got down to 500, but I didn't get beyond that. Oh my goodness. So I'm just thrilled to know that the PBE is still a working solution.
Yeah.
I had no idea, even at checkpoint.
So it's not at checkpoint. So the PBE, once you get to 7, it's the same criteria as if this bill had never been enacted, which is if you get to 7th grade and you have a personal belief exemption, you then need a medical exemption. But the thing is, if you pass 7th grade after, or if you get to 7th grade after 2021 or afterwards, you still fit the same new criteria. Your old medical exemption can't be grandfathered in beyond 7th grade. And so for the sake of our doctors, because there are these heavy criteria on how many medical exemptions and what they write in the school, it is better to have a personal belief exemption on file for those grades than it is a medical exemption if you haven't already submitted a medical exemption.
Okay. All right. So, and this goes along with going into 9th grade. In California, we have middle school, 7th through
so this
8th.
Is another, right. So
and
this
then
is
another checkpoint is 9th grade.
Right. And so this is another area that we, is very gray. Okay. So in the language, it says that the checkpoints will be either 7th grade or kindergarten, or when a child is admitted to school, a new school. So realistically, to me, that means that the checkpoints are TK, K, preschool, start at preschool, nursery school, daycare. TK, K, middle school, 7th grade, high school. So there are 6 checkpoints in total if you read the language that way. And that was my concern. And then I went back and looked, and the language for the checkpoints for medical exemptions and personal belief exemption grandfathering in is exactly the same language. And so, and with SB277, they only check your personal belief exemption at TKK or 7th grade. If you change middle schools or, change grades at 5th or 6th grade, we have, on their website, on the CDPH website, it says that your personal belief exemption transfers from one school to another. And so our deduction, again, doesn't say it clearly in the bill. Our deduction is that CDPH will read that in the same way they read and implement that in the same way they did SB277, which means that with SB277, the checkpoint was only TKK and 7th grade. Now, could they change that? Absolutely, they could change it. So we are at the liberty of this person at CDPH, and so it is really, we don't have a good understanding. I mean, we can deduct based on what they did last time and what bandwidth we really feel that they have. And so our deduction is that the checkpoints will be TKK and 7th grade. But could by the reading of the law, could they change that? Yes, they could.
Wow, this is such an insult to parental rights and just our freedom, our liberty, our health freedom in California. And these laws.
I think the biggest, we lost our parental rights with SB277. That was when the parents were sort of excommunicated out of the picture of what happens. And so, what we lost with SB276 and 714 was our doctor-patient relationship, was our trust, being able to have trust in our doctors that they would do the right thing, and that even if they did the right thing, that the state and other people would listen to that and would adhere to that. We now have CDPH governing our doctors, and it's not even the medical board, which, who oversees their licensing. I mean, I was floored that the medical board allowed CDPH to overtake the jurisdiction basically on medical exemptions. That just floors me that the medical board would allow that or want that. And so, but we've lost our parental rights here in California. We lost them in 2015 with respect to vaccinations. We've now lost our doctor right. Our doctors have lost their right to practice medicine in a do no harm way, because ultimately, who is that doctor that writes that 5th exemption? We were lobbying with one doctor, and he equated it to if I've done my taxes completely correctly, my accountant has done them what we feel is correctly, I have 5 pieces of paper that I need to give the IRS that I can choose to give or not give the IRS. I give them the first 4 and I know nothing's going to happen. But when I hand them that 5th exemption, I'm now subject to an audit by the IRS. Even though I think I've done everything right, do I want to be audited by the IRS? Absolutely not. Would I hand in that 5th piece of paper knowing that that's what triggers it? Absolutely not. And so, that's where our doctors are at. They're, this is their livelihood. I will say doctors are probably one of the most anal group in note-taking and ensuring that they have done everything, dotted their I's, crossed their T's for their patients, because their license is at risk every single time they treat a patient if something happens to that patient. And so, the majority of doctors don't get brought before the medical board, but that hangs over their head on a daily basis when they're practicing medicine. And so, to have this process that basically puts them in front of the medical board at the whim of the person at CDPH, that is a big deal for them. And it is not something they take lightly. And so they're left in a position where I think it will be much easier for all the doctors to say, you know what, I'm not doing medical exemption evaluations anymore. I'm sorry. I just don't do that anymore. Because for them, how are they going to choose the 4 that they actually write medical exemptions for? The first 4, the 4 that they think are most critical, the 4 that they think will have the greatest reaction to vaccines, have the greatest injury. How do they make that decision? It's easier for them while it goes against their being and their Hippocratic oath. It is easier for them to say, I'm sorry, our practice, and it's what has happened to hundreds of doctors in California. They just no longer do medical exemption evaluations. They just say, I'm sorry, I don't do that anymore. There's other doctors that do it, very few other doctors. But I think we will be at a point in 2 years' time, if we don't get a bill to make more of this clear and to support our doctors, I think we will have no doctors writing medical exemptions other than, the doctors that are writing them for cancer patients.
Right.
And we will have huge amounts of injury. And I think, it is unfortunate to say, but I think that's when this turns around. Senator Pan said that he scared the legislature by saying, well, you don't want measles in your district. You don't want an outbreak of measles in your district. I would counter that with, you don't want a vaccine-injured child coming out of this bill in your district, because I can assure you the vaccine-injured child, those parents, and the movement is going to be so much more vocal and taint your election than the person who got the measles.
Now, did anybody from our side have a chance to speak?
For what?
In the hearings, did we have a chance to?
So this is the issue with the legislative process. So in SB276, yes, we did. SB714, which made these sweeping amendments at the end, we did not. So they waived what I played rules gymnastics. They waived every rule that they can. I think there are about 7 rules waived that day. They pushed it all through on one day. And they basically, it had to be in print 72 hours, which it was because it went into print at noon on Friday. By Monday at noon, it was being heard in the Assembly floor. It should have gone to the Assembly Health Committee first, and there should have been ability to give public comment there. That rule was waived, that they didn't have to put it in the Assembly Health Committee. So they took it to the floor. They waived some other rule there because it wasn't on the file on the floor. They then voted on it. They then sent it immediately to the Senate, which also it should go into print on the Senate side and go through second reading, third reading. So they waived those rules on the Senate side. I believe it should have gone to the Senate Health Committee too, because there were amendments made that pertain to that, but maybe not. Went through the Senate Health Committee, went through the Senate floor, should have, and this is all happening on Monday of last week, should have gone to engrossing and enrolling, which is the Legislative Council, to make sure that the bill, all makes sense and that the wording is correct. Skipped that process, went directly to Governor Newsom's desk, and he signed it by 5 o'clock or just after 5 o'clock that day. So there was absolutely no public input on.
And is it true that they locked the hearing rooms? They locked people out when they
locked people in, they locked people out. The hearing rooms were basically full, and so they were not allowing people in. I think if somebody had come out of the hearing room, they probably would have allowed somebody to take that place. But they, what we saw on Monday, and we can go into the rest of the week, but what we saw on Monday was amazing. I mean, it was truly an amazing show of civil disobedience. And, the grassroots shut down both the Assembly and the Senate floor for a good hour. They chanted, they were truly using their First Amendment rights in the Capitol. I mean, there was chanting everywhere in the Capitol because people are so distressed. And so, what amazes me is that if this bill had not had the word vaccine in it, if it had chemotherapy or dialysis or some other medical treatment in it, this bill would have not been pushed through the legislature. It would have been a 2-year bill, or it would have died because it wasn't fully cooked. It wasn't fully baked. But instead, it was rammed through because of this vaccine issue. And, to me, that's not democracy. That's not the way that this should work. And so did what they do, was it legal? Yeah, it was legal. But it was, as one of the Republican senators said on the floor, it was pushing this through at the dead of night in the middle of the day. And that's really what it was. So, it was, I think the legislature has to realize that we're fed up. We're fed up with them illegally abusing the system, and that they have to be accountable for what they do. So yeah, I mean, I think we will see what happens. I think Governor Newsom, I think he was forced to sign the bill. I think I think, again, if it hadn't had the word vaccine on it, I think he would have been pushed back more. I mean, we saw he pushed back on SB1, which is an environmental bill, that it got all the way to his desk, and he pushed back on that. I think he was, I think the media went up against him saying, you made a deal, so you can't renege on the deal. And even though the bill got worse, he made a deal that if his 4 amendments got in, that he would sign the bill. And, I think we saw this year, and with this bill, we see so much more than other bills. I mean, it happens on other bills, don't get me wrong, but we saw that politics takes over policy. And that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be what's politically correct, what's politically right to do. It should be what are the concerns with that piece of legislation.
Yeah, I saw, there's this huge, big concern about this vaping. 2 people have died. Well, what about more than 2 people have died from vaccine injury just from SB277? I mean, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's in California, we legislate to the 1 and 2 people that something happens to. There's another law that, I'm trying to think what it was. It's some children's toy. I think it's a dart toy or something like that. But basically, it can't be sold in California anymore because one child stepped on it and somehow died from it. And it's kind of like, so we have legislation that doesn't allow that being sold here in California. And it's kind of like, we know people have died from vaccines. We know that. It's proven. There's a compensation program that has showed it. There's studies that have showed it. But yet we're still mandating and a product that there's no liability for. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. I mean, I do think I think it is. We'll see where it goes. I mean, I think there is a lot of, and we have to recognize that this is a global issue. I mean, there was an amazing rally in Berlin, Germany this weekend with just thousands of people marching the streets against mandatory vaccination. And I think, it's going to be a really interesting time in the next 5 to 10 years to see where the pharmaceutical industry ends up on this, because they are so powerful. I mean, they have a lot of money in this. And, but it's the voice of the people is rising up, and more people are becoming awake. And, I would say, as I look back on the legislative session, it was a complete roller coaster ride. It absolutely went up and down and up and down. But, I think one thing we have to be proud of is that we did an amazing job as a movement educating our legislators. There were always legislators that would have, will vote yes on, on this bill. But we had 15 Democrats in the Assembly that abstained. That's huge. We also had people in the Senate that, even though they voted yes, they expressed their concerns on the Senate floor. And so, I think that's where we have to look at what we did this year compared to SB277 was really, really big. I think, we have these setbacks. We had Austin Bennett push Senator Pan, which set us back hugely because and we had this lady on Friday throwing her menstrual cup on the Senate floor, which, thankfully, there's a video of her afterwards, and people should go watch it and see what they think of this lady. But, I think those two things set us back hugely, and we really, as a movement, and 99.9% of people absolutely are doing this in a peaceful manner. But if we want to have legislation going forward that is from our side and that cleans up this bill, we really need to keep those legislative relationships that we've developed over the past 6 months. We have to keep them, and we have to foster them, because ultimately, this bill will stay in place unless one of two things happen. There is a cleanup bill, or a bill that, takes it in a different direction, or there's a legal challenge. And while I think there could be a legal challenge that is more substantive than SB277, because I think there will be a child that will be injured from this law, and California will be, the Department of Public Health will be liable for that. We shouldn't have to go to injuring a child to force this in court. And, how many children are going to get injured before that court case is settled? Court cases.
And the school collapses under the weight of the special ed program.
Right, exactly. So I think I really believe that the way forward is, I think there are two ways forward. One of, and they both stem around legislation. One is bringing legislation from our side that is a cleanup bill that really, and anybody who wants to look at what our cleanup bill would include should go look at the amendments we suggested. And, people gave us a lot of flack for those amendments, but they're amendments that actually make it a better situation for both our doctors, and I say our doctors, but for any doctor to practice medicine, and for our children that have been injured by vaccines previously, or that are genetically susceptible to vaccine injury. And so, they are very much, and, our ultimate goal as a Voice of Choice Advocacy is to get rid of all vaccine mandates, and even beyond putting back a personal belief exemption. We don't believe that there should be any medical treatment required to go to school. I mean, that's crazy, that there's a medical retreat, or that you have to verify a medical treatment or the lack thereof to go to school. It's not right that that's a requirement to go to school. And so, that's our ultimate goal. Can we get there tomorrow? Absolutely not. Can we get there in maybe 5 to 10 years? Possibly. But I think we have to chip away at where we're at. And I think we have the forward momentum. Having said that, after Friday's event, I don't know. But we will see, we'll see, and we'll reassess where we're at. But the legislation is one. And then the other place where we really can make a difference is in the elections next year. So 2020 is an election year. All 80 of our, all 80 of our assembly members are up for re-election, and 20 of our 40 senators are up for re-election. That's huge. That's 100 people that we can vote in or out. And so that's a place that a Voice of Choice Advocacy, we can't as an organization work that out, but I personally will come together with some people who are interested in working on that, and determining which races we can impact, and ensuring that there is a candidate in the races where we think we can impact that is on, that believes in medical freedom, that believes in healthcare rights, really. And that doesn't mean to say, I hear a lot of people going, yeah, we got to get the Republicans in. We've got to get the Republicans in. Unfortunately, California is a top 2 state, which is the only one there is. Usually in most other states, you have the top 2 parties put forward their top candidate. And so you always have 2 different parties running. In California, we did away with that for an initiative probably about 10 years ago. And we have top 2 qualifiers. So the top people who get the top 2 votes are the ones that go into the primary. And so very often that is a Democrat against a Democrat. And so we need Democrats that are on our side, that are fighting for healthcare rights. And we're getting there. We're getting more of them.
Now, Christina.
But yeah.
Go ahead. Finish your sentence.
No, but that's the other place that I would say that we really can make a difference.
Now, aren't we entitled to full informed consent? What about the Nuremberg Code? Why don't we have a right to full informed consent? So we do have a right anymore. We do. I don't consent to this. So then homeschool your kids. But I have a right to go to school. I think that you do, that was our that was a Voice for Choice Advocacy SB277 case. You could be completely pro-vaccine in our case as a judge. That's the way we wrote it. We purposely wrote it that way because we were more likely to get a judge that was pro-vaccine than on our side, and so we wrote it in that way. And we had bodily autonomy. Basically, you can't supersede. You can't make somebody choose between 3 laws or fundamental rights. And so we had bodily autonomy in there. We had the right to raise your child the way you want to, parental rights, and we had a free and public education, the right to a free and public education. And so anybody who is pro-vaccine still can say, yes, those 3 things, and they've all been won in the Supreme Court individually. And so you bring them all 3 together, you should have a case that, yes, you can't make a parent decide between these 3 things, and so SB277 is illegal, or unconstitutional. But our lovely judge brought up polio, and we said polio has nothing to do with it. You can believe in the polio vaccine, but you still should see this as unconstitutional, and he could not get polio out of his head. And so we lost that case. But yeah, absolutely, you have the right, but the answer is that we are not in a place to adjudicate it in the court. Now, I have one more question. Now, Christina, we have a huge immigrant population. In my town, it's 77%. Yep. 77%. Now, all of these immigrants are compliant because they don't want to be deported.
Yep.
So they do whatever they're told to do. They don't ask questions. They don't push back.
Yep.
And I feel like it's my duty to push back at every turn, or they are going to walk all over us. They intimidate us. They try to intimidate us. They try to, bully us and take our rights away, because if we don't know our rights, we don't have any. Yep. Now, I think that if we didn't have so many immigrants, we'd already won this case. I mean, we would have won. I mean, because the whole population would rise up. Now, do you think we're better organized? Do you think that more and more people are waking up? Do you think more and more kids are just vaccine injured and parents are waking up? What do you think?
Do you think all of the above? I think we are in a place where more and more people are waking up. I mean, we saw that with this movement. I think there is better organization. I don't think we're 100% there, but I think there is better organization. Bringing, we just have an issue that our state is so big. Our state is 40 million people. The other issue that we have is that our legislature is a professional legislature, which means that they are in session from January until September every single year. You take other states. Texas has 4 months every other year. Montana is the best place. They have 6 weeks every other year. You go to somewhere like New Hampshire, and the whole population of the state is 1.5 million. Well, that's 1 assembly district and 1 Senate district put together. We have such a different dynamic here in California, and our legislators are professional legislators. That's what they do for their job. They don't do anything else for their job. They, in Texas, when you're a legislator for 4 months, the other year and, 8 months, you're doing your job. you're in your community. You're listening to the issues that are happening. And so, you know, I think we are just in a very different place in California, but I do think we are rising up. You know, what I say to people is find the thing. You cannot go back to sleep. You have to speak out. What speaking out means is different for each person. The difference, you know, there are some people who do really well talking to their legislators. You have to be rational, you have to be calm, you have to be professional, even if you hate your legislator. You know, consider them a client that you need to, you know, that you need to appease to get done what you need to get done. And so, you know, or a contractor that you've been forced to work with because that's the only contractor that does your specific job. If you go into a professional meeting yelling and screaming about how you hate this bill and how they did wrong and all of that, you're not going to have the same, you know, the same relationship with them as if you go in and you don't have to see eye to eye with them, but you can at least build the relationship because we need those relationships.
And try to find commonality with them.
Absolutely, try to find common ground. Yep. The other piece that, you know, I would say some people absolutely are terrified or don't want to go talk to their legislators. They just can't stand being in the same room as that legislator. Fabulous. Go find what you're good at. Like I was in a group the other day and there was a mom that said, you know, I went around and asked everybody in the group to say why they were there or how they came to, you know, how they came to be fighting SB276. And one mom said, you know, there was a woman in Whole Foods. I was pregnant and she came up to me and she said, you know, please do your research before you vaccinate yourself or your baby. And she said, you know, I was just like, oh, okay, fine. You know, let me go research. She must, you know, why? Let me go research. And, you know, we need those people. We need the people talking to the pregnant moms. We need the people talking to your Uber drivers, sitting in Starbucks, drumming up a conversation. You know, I know people have issues with their friends and family. A lot of people, you know, have been ostracized by their friends and family. Don't go to your friends and family. They'll come along soon enough. I've heard enough people say, you know, in 277 their family was completely against them and they're now awake and with them.
It took me 10 years.
Yeah.
It took me 10 years to work on my brother.
Right. I mean, it takes time with friends and family, but there are many people out there that are just unaware, and you're not going to get them to change immediately, but can you plant the seeds? Can you plant a seed every day? Can you say something to somebody that really makes them think, And, you know, the one that I use is, just please read the package insert before you go get vaccinated again. Please read the package insert so that if your child or you have an adverse reaction, you're aware of what that adverse reaction, that it came from the vaccinations. If you get somebody to read the package insert, suddenly they're really thinking about what is the informed choice that I have? What are the risks and the consequences? And then they, you know, can go on that path. You're not going to meet everybody, and not everybody's going to, you know, care about this issue or want to read more or want to do their research. But I think there is a unaware, uninformed population that just does whatever their doctors say. If there wasn't that uninformed population, we wouldn't have the amount of vaccine injury that we do. Most parents that are not vaccinating are not vaccinating anymore. They followed their doctor's schedule. They followed their advice. They went and they vaccinated their kids, and their kids got injured, and that's why they're not vaccinating. We need to stop that earlier. We need to have parents be aware, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and make an informed choice. And, you know, people say to me, well, you're an anti-vaxxer. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Like, if you have done all of your research and you come out and you say, you know what, I'm going to vaccinate my children on the CD schedule on time, and you've done all of your research, then go for it. I'm not going to stop you. You've done your research. I want you to have be informed when you're making a decision, as you would with any other medical treatment. You know, if you get cancer, you know, you always go for a second, or not always, but, you know, most people go for a second opinion. Most people look at, what are my options? And usually you're given 2-3 different options. Well, what if I go down this route? What if I go down this route? What if I go down this route? And you have that choice to make. Whereas with this, it's amazing to me that the pharmaceutical industry and the, you know, ardent pro-vaxxers are just like, no, don't ask any questions. Just vaccinate your child. No, it wasn't the vaccine that did it. You know, it amazes me.
Right. And then they just start calling us names.
Yeah. But I would say, you know, for everybody out there, even if you want to sit behind your computer, like, contact one of the organizations that's working on this, because I can guarantee you they've got, if you're willing to give an hour a week or an hour a month, they've got something that you could be doing for them, whether it's, doing research on the latest flyer they want to put together, whether it's, collecting statistics, whether it's, putting together, phone banking, whether it's, there are a whole bunch of different things that different
organizing
organizations
an event.
need, exactly, that need help with. And, everybody is good at something. And, I'm a big believer, do what you're good at, because you excel and you can do a good job there. So do what you're good at. If you have little kids and you don't have time, organize play groups. Have discussions about different topics, and this be one of them. Those types of things that you can just, share your knowledge, share what you know, and get the word out there, because we have to grow the population that are aware and questioning before we can get to the tipping point. So, there are many avenues that people can help.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christina. I appreciate your time today.
You're so welcome.
People can, go to avoiceforchoiceadvocacy.org. And if you still have questions after reading Christina's statement there, you can email her, and you have contact information there at that site.
We do. Info at avoiceforchoice.org is the email address. But yeah. And I will say, probably this week and next, I'm still struggling to get above water, but I usually respond pretty quickly.
Yes, and thank you so much for all you do, Christina. We're so grateful,
you.
And I'm so grateful you took the time today. So I'll let you go.
You're welcome.
Be well, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.